Ahoy, ahoy. Our guest today is Evan Burk. Evan is a speaker, trainer, and 17-year veteran coach who educates students, parents, coaches, and sports team executives and administrators on leadership development, coaching education, and building winning cultures. I believe you just recently wrapped up 2 esports ventures, and you're currently working with a couple of executive clients. So we're happy to have you, Evan. Welcome to Head Games.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Evan, you really have, I think, quite the career arc. How did you go from coaching 4th grade football at the Boulder Rec Center to coaching in the NFL in 6 years?
You know, it was a really interesting arc for sure. If I would have told you that I had a grand plan, I would be lying to you. But what I did have was kind of a North Star or a vision for what I wanted to do in sports. I played in high school. I wasn't really great, and I attended the University of Colorado as a student, not involved in the football program, had no inkling to be involved in the program, and really just kind of had an itch to be involved in sports again and just be around competition. And I had this idea that I kind of wanted to start to pursue coaching, and I didn't know where to start. And I don't have anybody in my family that was a big time football player. I don't have anybody in my family that coaches or is an executive for an NFL team. So my attitude was like, I'll just start. And so I started coaching for the 4th grade Cobras at the Boulder Rec Center. Unfortunately, we were 0-6 that first year.
Evan.
It was,
all coaching.
From those humble beginnings, it was all coaching. But I don't know if you guys know this about 4th grade football. The most important thing is the pizza party at the end of the year. And we had ours at Abo's in Boulder, and we absolutely killed it. From there, I started working at the high school in Boulder, Fairview High School, and wanted to get an opportunity to coach college. That was kind of like my goal, was to get to that level, and did like a letter writing campaign, contacted every Division I AA program in America, and got very little response. Probably a lot of thank you for your resume letters, one handwritten letter. And one thing that I did was I was coming back to Dallas, where I'm from, and I had called the 3 programs here in the area and just like, hey, I'm Evan Burk. I sent you a letter a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to be in Dallas next week. I'd love to come by and see you and meet you and introduce myself. 2 of the programs told me, hey, you don't need to come by here. We're good. And the director of football operations at SMU, said, hey, come on up here. We'd love to meet you. And that relationship kind of started. And it wasn't a job offer. It was really just them kind of telling me, hey, we have a volunteer ops position potentially available. I kept in contact with them, kept reaching out every two weeks or so. And after about 4 months of just consistent outreach, ended up getting an opportunity to be an ops intern that first year at SMU, and really was fortunate during my time there. I spent 4 seasons there, got to coach on both sides of the ball, offense and defense, did video, did operations. So I really had a really great experience there. Also got to go to school and get my master's degree. As great as all that was, at some point it had to come to an end, and it did after the 2009 season, which was the first winning season for the SMU football program in 30 years since the death penalty. So it was
all coaching again.
All coaching again. Yes, thank you, Ben. And so I was told that I was not going to be able to return the next year. And this is very common in coaching, right? Like either your time as a grad assistant is up and it's time for you to go get a new job, or, coaches are hired and fired or take new jobs every couple of years. So I kind of felt bad for myself for about a day, which is okay. Like we can do that. We can have our 24 hours of sorrow. But I remember I was like very resolute after that. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to try and get a job in the NFL. I'm going to give this like a 4-month go. If I don't get that, I'm going to start looking at other schools, and basically didn't know anybody. I didn't know anybody in the NFL, didn't know any coaches or executives or just anybody that worked for a team. So what I did was I made a spreadsheet of all the people in my network and every place they had worked. And then I made another spreadsheet with every employee in the NFL that I could find, and everywhere they had worked from like 1970 to 2009. And any place I saw a crossover where this coach that I knew coached with another coach or was at the same team as some player personnel or some executive, I would write a handwritten letter. And basically just introducing myself and telling them I wanted to break into the NFL and I want to meet them and I'm going to be in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl. And I ended up writing 450 handwritten letters
Holy
to all the people on this spreadsheet. And that got about 12 responses, 3 of which ended up like leading to interviews. And that was kind of the way that I got my foot in the door with the Miami Dolphins and ended up spending the 2010 season with them.
Jeez,
wow,
man.
That's a 3% response rate. This is a lesson for anybody who's listening. Everybody wants to be great. Everybody wants to work in the NFL or whatever. This is what it takes.
Yeah.
This is what it takes. It takes persistence and just going out there, contacting people, starting spreadsheets, handwriting 450 letters. But hey, look, man, like you did it. I think you seem to really set a goal and like you made it. You coached the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah. And that was a great experience. And I think the one thing I just want to point out was like, I was self-aware enough to know that I wasn't going to be able to just like get one of these jobs. I was going to have to do something a little different. It's very common in coaching to have a dad that coaches or to be a former player and obviously have those relationships throughout the years. I didn't have that. So how was I going to set myself apart? And again, that started with the spreadsheet. But I also went to the Senior Bowl, which is the senior all-star game they play every year in Mobile, Alabama. And I had like a plan. Like in December, I started writing these letters. I told them I was going to be at the Senior Bowl. I like stapled my business card to like a weird place on every letter. So that it was just like different, right? It was just like, they had to rip off the business card. It was just like, I was doing little things that I had no idea if they were going to work or not, or if anybody was ever going to read these. But I made like a top 10 list of the top 10 people I wanted to connect with at the Senior Bowl. And I ended up meeting 8 of those people. And it's not just, it's like any big conference you go to. It's not like you just show up and you're like, oh, I want to connect with Brett. Like, it's not like that. You have to go find these people and then also kind of have the awareness enough to be like, oh, okay, so that's the head coach, the general manager, and the head of player personnel for the Denver Broncos. I'm not just going to walk up and inject myself in the conversation.
Yeah.
Howdy, guys. Remember me? So, the handwritten letter writing was good because those people I was connecting with that I had no connection to, except that they knew somebody that I knew. It was great because when I approached them and introduced myself, you're the one that's—
You're the guy.
You're the guy that won't leave us alone. So I ended up meeting my connection at the Miami Dolphins that ended up helping me get that job as well. So I wish I could say that like I knew all this stuff was going to work, but I was just trying a bunch of different things and just trying to have as many conversations as I could and got really fortunate. I think a lot of success in life is timing. And that was an instance where not only was the hard work there, but also the timing worked out as well.
Yeah. Well, like you said, timing and hard work. And in this case, they really aligned. I mean, you obviously worked your ass off to get there. So you talk about having this North Star of making it to the NFL, which you did. That's absolutely incredible. So then what happens? Like what's next? You get to the league, you work with the Dolphins, and where do you go from there?
Yes. So I spent a year working with the Miami Dolphins, started in the video department, but actually got moved to special teams assistant. Early in the year, I had started helping those guys. I'm not a video guy. I was just trying to get into the building and kind of do the exact same thing I did at SMU, right? Like my first year at SMU, I'm passing out Chick-fil-A's and monitoring study hall. And I was going to do the same thing there. And so was really lucky in that instance. Coach John Bonamego, who was the special teams coordinator, gave me an awesome opportunity. And after that season, I had an opportunity to come back to the Lone Star State where I'm from, and I worked at McMurray University in Abilene, Texas. We were in the process of going from a Division III team to a Division II scholarship team. After 3 years there, I ended up having another chance to move and moved out to Los Angeles to work with the quarterbacks at UCLA. So that was kind of the rest of the coaching career. And after 2 years at UCLA, which was fantastic, absolutely loved living on the West Coast. And I thought UCLA was a great place to work. But I had kind of like a moment where I started to kind of question whether I wanted to continue down this path of coaching professional and high level collegiate football.
And the moment was?
So it wasn't like anything it wasn't anything profound to anybody else, but for me, it was very profound. So I'm a meticulous note taker. I've taken notes in every football meeting I've ever sat in, and we were late in the season, probably like 9th or 10th week. So, you're starting to get a little tired of everybody and just the grind of the season. And I just remember everybody was filling into the team room to have a meeting. And I'm usually sitting there 5 minutes before the meeting starts. And I just remember it just hit me very hard. Like, I do not want to go into this meeting. Not only do I not want to go into this meeting, I don't know if I want to be here anymore. And so, I wasn't going to just walk out the door, but it really was just kind of like one moment. I had never had that before. And I think if I had to just kind of like describe it as succinctly as possible, it was really that the North Star of wanting to be the head coach at the University of Colorado no longer motivated me. And it literally just happened in an instant. The week before, I was all in. Everything I'm doing is building that platform to one day be the leader of the Colorado Buffalo football team. And then it was like this one morning, it just hit me. And I no longer wanted to do that. And I just kind of knew that I wanted to do something else. I didn't know what exactly, but I kind of had a feeling like there's more that I want to do than just coach football. Not that I have any reservations about football coaching or recommending somebody else go into it. I just knew that for me, I had had a great 12 years and I just no longer wanted to pursue that lifestyle.
But you did it.
Yeah.
Yes, but I did it. So, it was a really, for me, it was, I got to check a ton of boxes in terms of like the things I was looking for getting into coaching, like coaching against the Texas Longhorns, like coaching in the Rose Bowl, coaching at a school, a university that was 5 minutes from where I grew up. And so add on top of that, the fact that all of my closest friends now are really from my football career and the relationships I made there. So it was just really great. But as a coach, you're never really settled. Yeah. You're very nomadic your entire life. If you guys are familiar with Dabo Sweeney, he's the head coach at Clemson. He's had 2 jobs in his life. He's coached at Alabama and he's coached at Clemson. And that's very, very rare. Most coaches do not get to do that. And I think one of the things I started to look around at was the people I was surrounded by. And you start looking at, they've made 15, 16, 17 moves in their life.
Yeah.
And, if you are about that lifestyle and it's not a big deal, like it really works out for a lot of people. But that was a lifestyle that I didn't quite understand when I made the decision to pursue coaching. And I think that over a long period of time, you kind of look at yourself and you're like, I live in Santa Monica. I'm kind of thinking that I want to do other things and I don't want to just sit in a dark room and watch film for 8 hours a day for the rest of my life. And, do I really want to move to small city in Iowa after this for the next coaching job? And so I made the decision to leave in February 2016. And so I had an amazing experience in terms of my career, but it was just like at a point in time where when you have the ability to look at the Pacific Ocean every day, you start to question like, okay, do I really want to leave here?
I think this is a natural transition to asking you a little bit about your business now, right? So what you're doing now after entering your coaching career is all about taking people who don't have much background in leadership or coaching and basically teaching them, training them to become leaders and coaches. So how do you go about taking these folks who have no background in leadership, no background in coaching, and training them, teaching them to fulfill this role?
Yeah. And I think for me personally, like I've always really identified as a positive teacher, as I have kind of like crafted in my own self-image, is like, as a coach, I really thought that was my authentic self. And I think early in my coaching career, I learned that I was trying to be other coaches that I had been under, but I'm not Coach Ortega for the St. Mark's wrestling team. He is his own self as a leader. I can't try and be him as a football coach. I can take certain lessons and certain things that I really like about his leadership, but I have to be true to myself. So I've really always viewed myself as a teacher. And about 2.5 years ago, I really started to get into this space of leadership, coaching, and helping train younger leaders that either have had very minimal leadership experience or maybe having their first leadership experience, particularly with a lot of the esports teams that I was working with in Los Angeles. And I think that for me, like I said, I really identify with the teaching piece. And it's something that I always really enjoyed and like nerded out on throughout my coaching career. I'm not the greatest X and O's coach. Like, I'm fully aware of that. But one thing that I was always constantly learning and educating myself on was like the team building aspect, the player evaluation aspect. Like what separates a good evaluator and what separates the really great players from the other talented players that just don't reach those levels of success or performance. And so I really started to do this probably, I would say, about 5 or 6 years into my coaching career, which led me, I wrote my master's dissertation on talent acquisition for college athletic programs. And I think that I really enjoy kind of like the research piece on team building and leadership. And I really enjoy working with people. And it just so happens that I got into different spaces. Like, I wasn't working with football coaches first. I was working with esports, and I didn't know anything about esports. I was coming in and I didn't even know what the top games were until somebody had like explained what League of Legends and Overwatch or in Call of Duty was. Like, I didn't even know that was a thing. So, as I've started to work with esports teams and other leadership executives that work for startups or companies, like, I've really enjoyed that challenge. But the teachings are all the same. Everything that I did in my coaching career as a coach and learned about team building, I apply to the people that I work with now. And I think that's one of the great things about sports, right? Like, everything is kind of interchangeable. The work ethic that it takes to be a successful high school or college player, that same work ethic translates once you hit the real world. So I've really enjoyed that aspect over the last 2.5 years as I've really started to work with different types of clients and teams and companies.
Yeah. I want to play contrarian because that's just apparently who I am. But I mean, you really seem to, I think it's true to say that you have acquired a lot of knowledge over the past, 14 years of doing this. I think you've picked up a lot, I'm sure, from coaching. And you said you're into the research, you've got a master's degree in this. So you must have, I'm sure, like a body of knowledge and education around this idea of leadership. There's other research that says that, we often tend to romanticize the effect that leaders actually have. We give them, we give leaders more credit than they're actually due. What do you say to this research? Is that true? Or do you think the effect of leadership is what we say it is? And it's not romanticizing it, but it is really speaking to the value of what a leader contributes to a team.
I love the contrarian view. Happy to talk about that. So, that's a really interesting piece because obviously I can only speak from my personal experience in terms of like what I saw with different programs. And like I said, I have a lot of appreciation for my career because I've worked with like some of the worst teams in college football in terms of record. And I've also been able to be at places where they've been able to turn that culture around. So from my view, I think leadership does have a huge effect on the program and really everybody that is involved in a company or a program. I will say though that, a leadership is a lot about bringing out the best in the people that you coach or the people that you lead. I think what happens is when we see either good leaders get off the track, or maybe people that are put in a leadership position and maybe not have as much success, or maybe just outright fail, I think they make the mistake of making it about themselves. And true leadership has nothing to do with that individual. Even though they may be extremely impactful, it's about the people that you impact and the people that you influence. And so in that kind of aspect, I do think that it's definitely at times can be maybe a little overemphasized or romanticized. But I think also that true leaders are ones that stand behind their team. Right? Like the team or the players or the people that you're leading, they're the ones that have to go out and perform. They're the ones that are on the ground level, really fighting those day-to-day battles. You're really behind them, encouraging them and trying to unleash their true potential. So I think it's interesting. And I'm sure that paper, I'm actually going to follow up with you and totally nerd out on that paper because I'd like to see what they look at. But from my personal experience, I've just seen what happens when you have kind of like a void of leadership, or maybe not like the right direction of leadership. And then what happens with the same team when you get somebody in place that just knows exactly what they're doing. They have a structure, they have a process, and that can really kind of take the exact same players that weren't successful before and make them a winning team. And I think it's the same players. And yes, it's the players that go out and make the plays, but it's about leadership to create that foundation that can allow those players to go out and make those plays and win those games.
That makes sense. So it sounds like you agree in the sense that it could be a bit smaller than maybe how I think maybe popular culture has romanticized leadership, but important nonetheless. It is leadership. It really sounds like, in your perspective, is the catalyst to the engine of the team. So without it, it's critical. It's smaller than maybe what we want to necessarily attribute, but it's critical in the sense of getting the real power of the team moving.
I think I'm saying that I identify with that, with what you just said and kind of that thought process. Me personally, I don't agree with that. I 100% think that the presence of leadership, whether we're talking about a car company that sells billions of dollars of product every year, or whether we're talking about a startup or a sports team, you cannot underestimate the impact that a good leader, an impactful leader can have on those organizations versus having somebody that was maybe just put in those positions or maybe isn't the right person to lead in those positions. I mean, we see this all the time, right? Like we see certain people specifically in sports, right? These people get these jobs. They've had this track record of success everywhere they've gone. And then they become the head coach of these programs and they run them straight into the ground, right? Like, do you think the New York Jets have like some semblance of strong leadership presence or structure or like a certain way of how they do things, or maybe even an understanding of why they win or lose games? I don't know Coach Gase.
Fire
personally.
Adam Gase.
I don't know him personally. I'm not advocating for anybody to lose their job, but I am saying that what's going to like if Dabo Sweeney became the head coach for the New York Jets at the end of this year, like there is a good chance that he is going to go in there and completely flip that organization around. And it may not be reflected in the win-loss record at first, but it's more about the building of the culture. And I think that's why I feel like leadership has such an impact and plays a huge role. I mean, you even see this on Wall Street too, right? Like what happens when a really strong CEO retires? Does the stock price shoot up, 10%? Of course not. No, it's like, oh my gosh, like they're losing their leader. They're losing the driver of this bus. Who knows who they're going to put in place for the next leader. And that's why you see like huge sell-offs at that point. And it's the same thing with sports teams, right? So I'm saying that I identify with the feeling that, hey, maybe we are romanticizing leadership. But I don't personally feel like that. I do feel like leadership, from everything that you do, everything that you communicate to your team, and building that culture is the most important thing that you do as an organization and as a leader.
Okay.
The most prominent,
the most contrarian. That's fair.
and I think
I'm open to it.
To your point from before, Evan, I think you can think of some common, well-known, I should say, sports examples, right? Like most prominent in my head is the Warriors, going from Mark Jackson, having the same core of guys. They bring in Steve Kerr, and they were good. Don't get me wrong, they were good with Mark Jackson, but there seemed to be this thing where he wasn't quite the guy to get them over the top, right? And they bring in Steve Kerr. He's got his whole idea about how he sets up his culture. He's trained with Pop. He knows all these legendary coaches. He comes in and bam, suddenly they're dynastic, right? Even before they get Kevin Durant. Arguably, they're better in some ways before they get Kevin Durant. So I think you do see examples of the power that leadership can have. So I feel like that's a really interesting debate, right? Do we overweight, or in your words, Evan, are we underweighting the power of leadership?
Right, exactly. And, the Warriors are an interesting example too. And each situation is different. And I think like when you're looking at the seasons, right, like those players that were on that first Steve Kerr coach team, they were a year more developed. Right. So it's kind of unfair just to say like, oh, this was never going to happen with Mark Jackson. We don't know, right? But one of the interesting things about Steve Kerr, for anybody that's followed him, that was his first coaching job. Right? Like he had played and he had been an announcer and he had been a general manager.
Yep.
And then that was his first coaching job and they win the championship.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. I was reading one time about Steve Kerr talking about how he, basically how he learned to coach, like what was it going to take? And what he did was I had to identify like what his coaching was going to stand for. Okay. And I think that, this is things that I do with, my leader, the leaders I work with, which is like, we need to define like who we are, who our core values, what our core values are, because those are going to inherently become a part of the team. Especially when we're looking at like professional sports teams. And I think this is true in the corporate world as well. Whether you're just leading a team, a group of people, or the whole company, that leader and the way that they conduct themselves day to day and what their core values are is what everybody is seeing around them. So I think a lot of times we get caught up in like catchy slogans or like what we write on the wall in the gym. And honestly, that stuff means absolutely nothing. Mission statements mean absolutely nothing when we just rely on them to motivate us by, painting them in the gym. That doesn't work. What you need is to come in, identify your core values. This is what Steve Kerr did before he even got that job. And then when he had identified his core values and knew what his program was going to stand for, then once he did get that opportunity, and yes, he picked a great job. I think he was deciding between the Knicks and the Warriors and chose the Warriors. And so I think he did pretty well on that. And one of the cool things about the Warriors is, and I heard Steve Kerr talking about his values, and one of his values is joy. And he talked about how he wanted his program to represent joy. And I think this is really cool because like Steve Kerr, if you look at his career playing, he played for Lute Olson at Arizona. They were 4-22 or something like that the year before he got there, or in like Lute Olson's first year. And he got to be there during like the first come up for the University of Arizona. And then in his pro career, he plays under Phil Jackson. He plays under Greg Popovich. He just literally is around some of the top basketball coaches that ever over the last 30 years. Yeah. And so, but the interesting thing is he didn't come in and just say, oh, okay, well, Pop did it like this, so I'm going to do that too. He had to like actually, look within himself and decide what was going to be most important to him. And so he talked about joy. And the cool thing about that in the Warriors is like, what do you think of when you think of Steph Curry? right? You almost think of him as like this joyous player.
Absolutely.
Like he's always smiling.
Yeah.
And like that team as a whole looks like a lot of fun to play with. And, if you ever watch the Warriors, how can you, oh no, am I off here?
No, because like I think one of their core abilities is to attract talent because, with a lot of these guys, like I think it was with Durant, he was curry favored by
Draymond Green.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the fact that he's able to do that, and they missed out by not being in the bubble this year, by not being able to court these other players. But I think a big part of that is also the values that the team puts out there and says, like, we have a lot of fun. And like, you're the one of the most talented basketball players in the world. Where do you want to go? And what do you want to do with your life? You want to win championships, but also you're right. You want to have fun and like be a part of a joyous team.
Hey, that doesn't mean that to win, you have to have fun. But like for Steve Kerr, it's one of the most important things. And the Warriors obviously bought into that 100% from the moment he got there.
I think just to echo the point, I mean, you see that even with new guys, like the Warriors just traded for Kelly Oubre. And so he's a new addition to the team, new addition to the culture. One of the first things he says is he's just like, I'm so stoked to get there and like play with these guys and like see the, as you said, joy that they play with and to get into that system and just like soak it up basically, because there's such a reputation for the culture that Steve and, on down from the top that they've created, and that just permeates out from everything they do.
Yep. God, it's been a long week and year. The fact that I'm blanking on Draymond Green's name. Who's that
Dude,
guy?
they haven't played a game in like 9 months.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Last question for you, Evan. It's a two-parter. So tell us a little bit about the esports industry. Tell us how you help coach in terms of leadership for the esports industry, and tell us a little bit about the venture that you currently have.
Sure thing. And, when we're talking about esports, I think it's just always important to kind of note that there's really kind of two different, silos. You have gaming, which is really kind of like seeing people playing. You probably you're aware of like Twitch, where people can stream live their playing. And sometimes it's like somebody dressed up in a costume, or maybe it's just somebody doing it for fun. And that's kind of what I consider gaming. And then esports is actually like competitive gaming, right? So the like actual leagues, actual teams. And I was fortunate to kind of say, similar to how I networked to get my job in the NFL, a lot of cold DMs, cold emails that went unanswered, thanks but no thanks responses. But I got in with a couple of people and I just slowly started to learn about esports. So I didn't go straight in and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. It was more having conversations and just asking like, hey, I have an idea of kind of taking my football background and football coaching and kind of doing that in a leadership development style for the coaches here. One thing to understand about esports is like, it's all very young. It's very young players, like sometimes like 17, 18-year-old pro players, very young coaches. It's just a very young industry as a whole, and really has obviously become mainstream here in the last few years. But there aren't a lot of Bill Belichick or Phil Jackson like models to use for your leadership within esports. And so my idea, and as I was meeting people and learning more and more, it became evident that, there's definitely a place here for leadership development and, maybe in like some sense, like almost like a mentorship, right? Like really helping people understand why they do certain things. I think that I've learned more about coaching in the 4 years since I left coaching than I did when I was in coaching. And I think, there's a couple of reasons for that. There's so much going on when you're a coach that you really never have like true time to dedicate to, learning things like, how to listen better, what is active listening, how to ask powerful questions that can, make players open up to you. And I never learned these things when I was coaching. And so these are just some of the things that I started nerding out on myself and using in my coaching. And it really resonated with the people that I was working with. And it's not even so much like telling people how to coach. It's more helping the leaders find their authentic leadership voice. Yeah. So it's not saying like, hey, you can't yell at players. players, but it's also saying like, hey, you can't not like hold players accountable. It's more kind of like, hey, so you yelled at a player the other day and that player completely shut down and basically ruined practice. So like, why did we yell at that player? Now, I kind of like, to me, I get excited. I get really passionate about kind of like digging into that, understanding the reasons behind it, and then just kind of doing essentially like an evaluation of how could we have handled this better? This is definitely going to come up again. How can we do this? And I have my own core principles, right? We were just talking about that with Steve Kerr. So I have my own core principles that I kind of have, but I don't like say that everybody I work with has to have them. It's more kind of like, hey, I came up with these. Like, you can steal them if you want, but like if they don't speak to you, like then you having attacking problems as one of your core values isn't going to have quite the same effect. But to me, like that speaks to me and everything that I'm about as a coach. So that's kind of the work that I'm doing. And I think in esports, like I said, it's very young, but it's very exciting. I don't know anything about the games. I mean, I watch the games kind of like on Twitch. So occasionally I'll say something like in a meeting where I'll be like, oh, well, like you got to get the tank past the checkpoint or something. And they'll be like, oh, Evan, like,
wow.
Ooh, big guy actually knows what he's talking about. Okay, so this might sound stupid, but like, what does a coach in esports do? Is it somebody sitting next to the player telling him like who to talk shit to next?
So a lot of it is much like any traditional sport, right? Like they're planning the day of the team. What are they going to say in practice review, which is a very big thing in esports. So you practice against some of the other teams in your league during the week, but you're filming that, right? And so you're doing practice review. You're also kind of like, are we going to have a team meeting? What are we going to put in the snack drawer or the snack shelf? And I mean, anything that a professional or college coach would do is what the gaming coaches are doing and these esports coaches are doing. So a lot of it also centers around strategy, right? Like, you can't just coach Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. You actually have to have like plays you run and like, certain tactics that are being employed in the game. And one of the things that I've seen that's like really big, and I think this is true for all sports, but it's definitely big in esports, is communication and helping players understand how to communicate during the games. When I was working for the Los Angeles Gladiators, which is an Overwatch team in the Overwatch League, they had a mixed roster is what they called it. So they had players from all different countries. And so you kind of have two theories on team building within the Overwatch League because it's such a big game overseas internationally. And so you have Korean players, players from Finland, players from Denmark, players from Canada, America, China, all over the place in these games or on these teams. And so like, how do you get them to communicate with each other? That can be a challenge too. So it's a lot very similar to any traditional sports coach and kind of like what they do throughout the day. But it's really kind of like managing the team on a day-to-day basis and handling the strategy, techniques, and fundamentals that are required to be successful in the games.
It's awesome. Like, first of all, I think the like ubiquity of sports and the ubiquity of psychology coming together for something really cool. Like, 15, 20 years ago, no one would have dreamed that this would be a possibility. And now, like with the proliferation of both of these things, it's really cool. And this is such a cool venture. And, it was great to have you on, I think, because it also relates to psychology. I will give you that article. I will pass on any literature we have. It's one
Please
thing to look at. It's one thing to look at somebody's resume and say like, okay, here's this guy who's, had these opportunities to coach in college, NFL, esports. It's another to really hear about how people get there. And while I think your story is very much a story about grit, what I think was also important, what I'm taking away from it, and maybe what others might take away from it as well, is that you were honest with yourself at a certain point. You said, you know what, and it just happened sort of on the whim, but like you were honest when you said my North Star is no longer my North Star, and you pivoted. And a nod to Steve Kerr, like maybe you wanted joy, right? You were looking for something that got you out of bed in the morning. So, man, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great learning about what you do and about who you are and how you got there. We had nothing but the best wishes for you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. This was awesome.
Yep. Please rate and subscribe where applicable. And thanks as always to our editing team for putting together today's show. Evan, are you on Twitter? Do you want people to find you and bug you?
I am on Twitter. Feel more than welcome to bug me. I'm at Coach Evan Burk.
There you go. I'll bug you. We're at Head Game Psych. I'm on Twitter at Dr. Brett Levine. You can find that guy on Twitter at BD Rosenberg, PhD. And thanks as always for tuning in.